Ivan Pavlenko, From Family to Family, Chapter 1, Part 2, Point 3, Our Family Tree, read by Natalia Buzova. Now, I will turn to the fourth son, Uncle Maxim, born in 1898. He stood out among his brothers primarily for his heroic strength, especially for his broad shoulders and pitch-black forelock. In his youth, his father sent him to study as a blacksmith, and then his whole life was spent at the anvil in the collective farm forge. It used to be that men said that when Maxim swung his hammer, the wind whistled. He was stocky, strong, as if forged from iron, and the face seemed to be scorched by that fire from the anvil. During the Civil War, the people of Denikin took Uncle Maxim by force into their army, which was then retreating to the south. But he fell down with typhus near Zinkiv. He was lying at some good people's place, and they wrote a letter to Yashniki about it. And his father went after him on horses. He brought home the barely alive son and got sick from him himself. And he didn't get up. He died at the age of 53. Uncle Maxim took Lukia Mikhailovna Pavlenko, Butsitchina, as his wife. It was one of the branches of our family, but already distant enough to marry. Uncle Maxim and Aunt Lukia built a house for themselves on the farm between Simonchuk and Prisyashny. And at the age of 60, they bought a better house from the former head of the collective farm, Pavel Yosipovich Solonucha. And when Uncle Maxim died, Uncle Petro's Marusia bought the house. It is still standing just opposite the bus stop in Sarina. Uncle Maxim was a blacksmith, but he also fished, kept a small apiary, and was my godfather. During the Patriotic War, Uncle Maxim was at the front and returned home with many medals and thanks from the command. He served at the time as a blacksmith in the cavalry corps. On occasion, he jokingly said that when our troops took a big city, then he would also have a medal, because he forged horses in such a way that they ran as far as Berlin itself. In general, Uncle Maxim was always cheerful and witty in the company. He liked to catch one of the older brothers, especially Uncle Petro, who was mostly serious and inclined to teach someone or judge something without appeal. Uncle Maxim nullified all that with his comments, and Uncle Petro had no choice but to respond with a retort. Oh, Max. This is how the younger brother was nicknamed since childhood. I especially remembered Uncle Maxim's funny story about how he and Uncle Petro butchered a boar in a German way. Uncle Petro had returned from captivity where he had worked at the slaughterhouse. The father was no longer alive, and the mother asked his son to butcher the boar. They took a track knife, an axe, and a rope. Well, the boar was healthy but not well fed. You just can't hold it in your hands. You need to knead it. So Uncle Petro said, I'll do it in a German way. First, I'll hit it on the head with my axe butt. It'll fall, and then I'll slaughter it. Well, if the elder brother is going to do it with certainty, then the younger one agrees. Uncle Petro took an axe in his hands, approached the boar, swung it, and hit with it. He didn't hit the forehead, only half the ear was knocked off. And there the boar howled and rolled like a wheel around the barn. The brothers barely had time to climb up the barn, and from there they somehow threw a noose on the boar, tied it up, and stabbed it in the homely way. During the story, all the uncles and relatives were laughing, even holding their stomachs, because Uncle Maxim was telling it in a funny way. Uncle Petro also laughed and said, That's Max. Uncle Maxim and Aunt Lukia had two sons, Fedor and Risha. Elder Fedor, born in 1922, was tall, stocky, and black-haired. He returned from the war as a captain. He served in the anti-aircraft defense forces, and probably that is why he remained alive. We all had so much joy. An officer with golden epaulets, This was not the case in the village before. We met and saw him off with the whole family. And 2 years later, he came not alone, but with his young wife. She was small, black-haired, and friendly, played the guitar. Her name was Galia, Russian, from the Ivanov region. Later, they had children, Volodya and Sasha. Fedor dreamed of settling in his parents' house after retirement, but he stayed in Poltava and then moved to his son in Kostroma. He's been living there with Galia to this day. Volodya's son teaches music at school, and the younger Sasha lives in Moscow. The younger son of Uncle Maxim and Aunt Lukia Hrisha followed his father's physics. Above average height, broad-shouldered, only fair-haired, and with the mother's smile. He graduated from the Trade Institute and first worked as a manager in a store of industrial goods, and then a trading base in Lochvitsa. Hrisha married Serhiy Pogulyai's daughter Halia, who worked in Lochvitsa at a sewing factory. They built a nice house, but Hrisha did not live in it for long. He died of incurable disease, cancer. Halia stayed with two sons, Yura and Sasha. Both then studied at institutes. Yura now lives in Kiev on Svetoshinska Street. He is married. Where he works, I don't know. And Sasha, after the institute, works at a wheel factory in Kremenchuk. He is married. Aunt Lukia died at the age of 70, and Uncle Maxim lived to be 83 years old. He kept several beehives and fished and cultivated a garden. He was still strong and died suddenly. He had a stomach ache. He lay at home for a day or two. It got really bad. They took him to the hospital in Lochvitsa. There they discovered that my uncle had had appendicitis a few days before, and it was already too late to do anything about it. The fifth son of grandfather Grigory and grandmother Sophia was Alexei, born in 1905. Unlike other brothers, he was not drawn to the ground. When he was still small, he was often scolded by his father for avoiding work, hiding in the bushes or in the horse manger and reading books. He wanted to study, but his father believed that a person did not need science, but some kind of craft was needed. But he did not have time to give it to his youngest son. At the age of 20, Uncle Alexei joined the Komsomol. He lived with his mother and younger sister Himka. The mother worried that he would not be a master, and he was going to study or go to some kind of construction. The Komsomol sent him to the Red Army. He served in the border troops in the Far East, and after the army, he first entered the vocational school and then the University of Vladivostok. In 1936, Uncle Alexei returned to his native village and began working as a physics and mathematics teacher at the Yakhniki Secondary School. He got married that year. His wife, Aunt Pasha, as mentioned earlier, was the daughter of a former maid and Mr. Pustovoyka. She lived with her mother and worked on a collective farm. But among the village girls, she stood out for her beauty and decency. My mother brought her together with Uncle Alexei. All our relatives were satisfied with the marriage. I was at a wedding, and for the first time in my life, I drank a small glass of wine from just getting married. And I put something on the plate, probably a coin that my mother gave me. In the first days of the war, my uncle was not accepted into the army, and then the Germans came, the occupation began. The school in Yakhniki closed, and the uncle returned to his native village, to the house of grandfather Yevdokim. My uncle worked in the communal yard. That was the name of the collective farm under the Germans. They took him to Germany, but he escaped halfway along with Musi Stetsenko, the Strelets, and hid for some time. And in 1943, he went to the front. He fought as a private, although he had a high education. The fact that he was in the occupation had an influence. After the war, Uncle Alexei worked as a teacher in a secondary school at the Stalin sugar factory, later Chervonozavodske. There they built a house with Aunt Paraska and raised two children, daughter Lida, born in 1939, and son Anatoly, born in 1940. Both studied well. Lida graduated from school with a gold medal and Anatoly with a silver one. Then Lida graduated from the Institute of Foreign Languages in Kiev and worked as a translator at the Mariupol port, and her husband worked there at the customs office. He recently died. Her current surname is Vakulenko. Address, Nakhimov Avenue, Mariupol. Anatoly graduated from the Polytechnic Institute in Kiev. He worked on the thesis for the title of Candidate of Sciences and now works at a research institute. He lives in Kiev, in Nivki, in Saratovska Street. He is married, has two children, daughter Paola and son Pavlo. Aunt Paraska died prematurely. Her life was cut short, but the same inexorable cancer. By the way, Mr. Pustovoitov also suffered from it. Now I will move on to my aunts. Hanna, born in 1901, was the eldest among the daughters of grandfather Grigory and grandmother Sofia. She was married to Petro Kisil in Stepuki, a wealthy man, but a poor landlord. They had three children, daughter Natalka, born in 1922, and two sons, whose names I no longer remember. During the famine of 1933, the whole family died out. Only Natasha remained alive, who alternately lived with us, with Uncle Petro and Uncle Maxim. After the famine, she returned to Stepuki and was dependent on the collective farm. During the occupation, she was taken to Germany, and from there she never returned to her domestic hell. Did she find a mate? Or did she just stay where she felt better? Or maybe she died? The second eldest daughter of grandfather Grigory and grandmother Sofia was Aunt Oksenia. I think she was born in 1907, cheerful and talkative, with freckles on her face. She got married to Grigory Govarucha from Shmugli. The in-laws were good landlords, so during collectivization they fell into kulaks. They were evicted from the house and taken away. But the young daughter-in-law and child were not harmed. Grigory actually studied at an agricultural technical school, and during the holidays he hid in Yashniki. Aunt Oksenia and her child first stayed with people and then returned to her house and worked on the collective farm. After graduating from the technical school, Grigory was sent to work in the Sribna district of the Chernihiv region. There he began to work as an agronomist in the village of Svetlichne, where he eventually took his wife and the child. She had a severe headache due to high blood pressure. She had a stroke and died. The husband was also gone. Two children remained, daughter Hala, born in 1926, and Ivan, born in 1940. Hala studied to be an agronomist and got married in Belarus. She worked there as an agronomist, and recently she was the head of the village council. She came to Yashniki for our family reunion with her husband, a driver. And her brother Ivan lives in the village of Burivka, Rybkinsky district, Chernihiv region, works on a collective farm in charge of the lower garage. Aunt Himka, born in 1909, was the youngest daughter of grandfather Grigory and grandmother Sofia. All the brothers got married and left the house. The sisters got married, and only Aunt Himka remained alone in the parental house. She survived the famine of 1933 and only then married Prokip Makovetsky. She had two sons with him, Ivan and Mikhailo. And then the war started. Prokip went to the front and did not return. The children grew up without the father, and when their wings grew strong, they flew into the world. Ivan got married in Novosibirsk and Mikhailo in Kremenchuk. Aunt Himka still lives in Yashniki. She is strong, similar to Uncle Maxim. So I told you about the whole large family of grandfather Grigory and grandmother Sofia. More about one, less about the other. What came to mind was written down. I can add only a generalization. All uncles and aunts were of medium height, but bony and hardworking like all peasants of that time. Uncle Andrei and Uncle Petro were dark-haired. My father and Uncle Alexei had black forelocks, and Uncle Maxim had pitch-black ones. The sisters were dark-haired. My father and Aunt Oksenia had golden freckles on their faces. The literacy of uncles and aunts was the same, 3-4 grades. They did not reach for more. Only Uncle Alexei started on his own. The uncles were farmers in the best sense of the word, excellent masters of many types of peasant work. They would start mowing, then shave off so that no blade of grass would remain. They took the land in their hands and grimly determined that would grow on it and how much, and they sowed a field by hand no less than now they sow with a seeder. When the collective farms appeared, they resisted for a long time, and then they were forced to go there, following other people. They did not climb into the ranks, did not show activity at meetings. They sat among people and kept silent. You couldn't get a word out of them. They only looked from under their shaggy eyebrows at those who were too active. All uncles were tight-lipped, traditionally strict in their families. They did not drink alcohol, did not use rude words. They didn't laze around and rest like we do now. They worked every day from dawn to dawn. On minor religious holidays, they fished, looked after bees. This probably belonged to the category of entertainment. And on major holidays, nothing was done. They slept longer, dressed in better clothes, and ate more heartily. They went to their neighbors or relatives and had endless conversations about the weather, the harvest, and the senseless collective farm life, wondering what would happen next. Outwardly, the uncles were loyal. They did not show opposition to Soviet power, although they did not perceive it as their own. I remembered how during collectivization, the representative of the district committee of the party spent the night with us. It seems to me it was Harmash. He ate and drank and then started mocking my mother, who hung many icons in the house. And what did he have to do with that? Why did he touch what was sacred for a believing woman? Just before that, the church in the village had been closed. The bells were dropped. After scoffing, the commissioner began to convince the mother that everyone would be fine in a collective farm without a church, that the Soviet government was good. It was the people's government. And my mother answered him, maybe it is good, but why does it hate people so much? If you believe the loud words and slogans, it seems that the government is really the people's one. And if you take a closer look at what the government created in those times, when it bent the peasant double, it turns out that it was anti-people's, foreign, and thrice cursed.